Units of the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces carried out strikes on enemy military targets in the temporarily occupied Crimea and Zaporizhia region. Specifically, in the area of Verkhney Kurganoway, a missile systems command post and a firing group were hit. In Shkolnoye, a component of the S-400 surface-to-air missile system was destroyed, and near Zaporizhia, an ammunition depot belonging to Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army was hit. On the Sloviansk front, Russian forces attempted to break through the defenses of Ukrainian units, using MTLBs, motorcycles, and infantry. The attack was launched from the area of Siversk, with an attempt to outflank the positions. The main strike was carried out by armored vehicles, while motorcycles were used as a distraction. Ukrainian units responded quickly and destroyed the MTLB along with its troops, as well as eliminated the enemy on motorcycles. The remaining Russian infantry are still being located and destroyed. Meanwhile, in the Konstantinivka direction, the Russian army conducted assault operations in the areas of Sofievka, Pleshchevka, Ivanopilya, Ilyanovka, and Stepanovka. In the Pokrovsk area, clashes took place near the settlements of Kotlina, Udachna, and Maravka, Molodetskaya, File, and Dachnaya. And on the Huliaipol section of the front, Ukrainian defenders repelled enemy attacks near Mirna, Zeleny, and Dobrapilya.
The Russians have no intention of switching to the defensive. That's obvious. They're trying to keep advancing. So far, these are stalling. Winter and autumn campaigns, the enemy's advantage. In manpower, that's exactly what it's aimed at, to stretch our forces as much as possible and keep us from concentrating resources on the most critical directions. But here, they're not succeeding.
A Grad multiple launch rocket system near Myrnohad was destroyed by soldiers of the 79th Air Assault Brigade. The Russians hid the launcher with its ammunition in the yard of a private house. Despite the camouflage, Ukrainian soldiers detected the target using drones. After that, a precise strike was carried out, destroying the equipment. The defense forces are improving their tactical position in the Alexandrivka direction. Ukrainian fighters are actively conducting a counteroffensive using artillery, drones, and infantry, according to the 148th Artillery Brigade of the 8th Air Assault Corps. UAF units are actively targeting the positions of the Russian army, destroying equipment, personnel, and logistics. The enemy is trying to hold their positions, using small infantry groups and drone systems. However, these actions don't give the Russians any chance to turn the situation in their favor.
The defense forces are powerfully pushing back two Russian armies, or what's left of them. And further south, along that engineered north-south front line, the Russians are trying to keep pushing for success. In other words, their strategic plan to encircle the Ukrainian forces near Zaporizhia didn't work out. We didn't let them pull it off. So now, just like in Donbass, they're switching to tactical attempts instead. This also applies to their attempt to encircle, specifically to surround the Orikhiv defensive stronghold. And secondly, to advance as far as possible along the north-south defensive line.
In the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 930 Russian soldiers. The total losses of the Russian army have already exceeded 1,280,000 people. The Ukrainian armed forces also destroyed 2 tanks, 3 armored vehicles, 20 artillery systems, 1 multiple rocket launcher, and 120 units of automotive equipment.
Everything that we are observing right now is directly associated with the hostile forces that are currently standing against us. Lieutenant, we welcome you, and glory to Ukraine.
Hello.
Glory to the heroes. I greet you and our viewers.
I'll keep it simple and just ask you, how should we interpret, let's say, these official figures from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine regarding what? In the past 24 hours, 1,710 Russian occupiers have been eliminated, and there have been 268 clashes. Yes, what does such intensity indicate?
This points to a significant increase statistically. Both in your broadcasts and in other media, it's usually reported that the number was around 150, with a maximum of 200. In terms of clashes, with corresponding distribution across different directions. And here, they're talking about losses of about 1,000 to 1,200 in a single day. Yeah, these are very serious numbers. This suggests that the enemy wants to close out plans that were made as far back as last year. Deadlines. All of them have been missed, like the two concepts of capturing 4 regions, as well as creating buffer zones, since all the deadlines have been blown. The task now is to organize a spring-summer campaign, an offensive one, and that requires resources. First of all, as we discussed, since December, the balance of people has been negative. They bring in fewer people than they lose at the front each month. And under these conditions, it's hard to solve the issues of launching a large-scale offensive. That's why the intensity is so high. For example, near Pokrovsk, it's the highest. You mentioned the number, about 70. But despite this, in order to change the situation and improve things for themselves, the enemy in Zaporizhia, they are transferring their troops from Pokrovsk and also intensifying their actions. Konstantinovka, Liman, Slavyansk. And before that, we remember from last year that at first they developed a consistent plan of advancement. That is, to capture the Pokrovsk-Minorgrad agglomeration and then move up. Konstantinovka is active both in Slavyansk and Kupiansk. However, once again, all their deadlines are passed, Putin is raging and fuming, and that's why they're organizing parallel actions. And for that, they need resources. We can see that the situation with resources has gotten worse, and he's afraid to carry out a full mobilization. Well, I don't think he will, most likely. That's why A409 is in the plans this year to bring thousands to the front in Russia. The question arises, where are they supposed to get all of this from? And they had a financial deficit at the end of last year and the beginning of this one. And now they're trying to fix that situation. The war in Iran and high oil prices are helping, but all of this, so to speak, is still in progress. And what made things worse for them is that Ukrainian defense forces are carrying out counterattacks in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Well, and almost there. They've liberated all the villages. Previously, these were captured by the enemy, and attacks are also being carried out north of Melitopol. And in order to disrupt these actions, offensive, tactical level, but still offensive actions by the Ukrainian defense forces, they are trying first to block these advances and second to attempt their own offensives. In this case, in the Zaporizhia region, it looks like they're advancing slowly, west of Huyapo. These are the trends that have been unfolding over the past day in different directions.
In addition to the question of how many enemy troops are being eliminated, Ukrainian defenders have neutralized about 100,000 Russian soldiers over the past 3 months. That's 30, 35, and 28,000 respectively. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated this in an interview with the New York Post. According to him, Russia is mobilizing 40 to 45,000 people per month so that the Russian army doesn't grow larger and the Kremlin can't expand its aggression. The Ukrainian armed forces need to eliminate roughly the same number of enemy personnel. How do you assess this? And in order for Russia to achieve its objectives regarding the offensive, and let's remember that, Zelensky also said that the Ukrainian armed forces prevented a major Russian offensive that had been planned since, roughly speaking, the end of last fall and was expected in the spring. All of that was prevented. But regarding the next offensive, considering today's losses, does this mean it will simply be postponed? And roughly speaking, how much manpower would be needed to resume this offensive?
For now, it's being postponed. First, based on the situation we described that's unfolding on the front lines, it shows that they need to respond to our active defense. Our Commander-in-Chief, General Syrskyi, talked about this. And since this is being done this way, we talked about the counterattack in Dnipropetrovsk region and Zaporizhia. This distracts their forces and doesn't let them concentrate. And there are deadlines set according to the plans they made at the end of last year for this year's campaign. These deadlines have basically been missed thanks to such actions. But if they manage to reach 45,000 a month, and a month ago they had 30 to 35,000, that means they are still building up a reserve. They plan to form, well, supposedly 9 divisions, 9 brigades, and in total 409,000. But those are just their plans. Last year, they also failed to meet those plans because they intended to form 14 divisions, but only managed 7. And out of those 7, they had already used the resources from 2 or 3 last year. In the directions that were the most critical and difficult for them in terms of fighting, that includes Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, Melitopol, and for high-level offensive operations in the spring, they need resources. On their side, the situation's pretty tough for them. That's clear, and it's good for us. And we have our own objectives. We remember that about a month ago, the Minister of Defense talked about destroying 50,000 per month. That would at least make it possible to halt further advances. But if we can gather enough resources, we could consider some offensive actions, meaning an operation at a higher operational or even strategic level. For now, we have enough strength to carry out these kinds of counterattacks that disrupt the enemy's actions, strategic offensive actions for the enemy.
Igor Alexandrovich, so if we're talking about this, look, once again, we're coming back to these losses. We're recording them. I don't know, this must be a record, right, for all time? I just don't remember numbers like these.
Yes, it's a record. At first, I didn't even realize these were losses.
Yes, that these are losses. 1,710. Igor Alexandrovich, well, does the enemy have the ability to keep going at this same pace? Any kind of offensive actions? Sure, they can make plans, but do they actually have the capability?
At the moment, under these circumstances, which, as we've discussed, are being shaped by the defense forces of Ukraine, they're disrupting these plans. So the timelines for carrying out their plans aren't being met, which means they have to deal with their resources. They want to reinforce their forces with more drones as a resource. They have specialized units for this, and they're planning to scale them up, what they call Rubicon. So their goal is to supply a larger amount of equipment, especially drones. And they're looking for ways to do this, like recruiting more operators. That's why they're working with universities, targeting students who are struggling academically. During exam periods, they're offered the chance to join the armed forces with their spot and tuition preserved. To make it more appealing, they're told they'll be drone operators, basically to strengthen the force. Of course, those who aren't suitable, or if needed, can easily, or more likely not so easily, be transferred to the infantry. That's why they're using all sorts of tactics, including these kinds of approaches. They understand the role and importance of drones and their future potential, especially drones that operate not just in the air, but also on land and at sea. And for that, they need operators whose training takes a certain amount of time and requires a specific skill level. Take, for example, a drone fighter. At the moment, unless there's a specialized artificial intelligence involved, then the skill level of a drone operator who is tasked with destroying enemy drones needs to be above average. And that, in turn, means that operators need to be trained for a long time. Their skills need to be maintained, and so on. So this is a serious issue, even though they plan to address it. So at the moment, either the issues aren't fully resolved as they had planned, or there just aren't enough resources because of this. That's why large-scale offensive operations, as they had planned and wanted on a strategic level, are being postponed. In other words, they're now focused on overcoming the difficult circumstances that have arisen for them.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.